At my sister's graduation party, my dad raised his glass and said, "Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating." Everyone laughed at me sitting quietly in the corner until I took the microphone and announced something that made the entire hall go silent. I, 32M, stood in the corner of the banquet hall, nursing a glass of cheap champagne while my sister's graduation party roared around me. The venue was packed with relatives, family friends, and colleagues of my father, all gathered to celebrate her MBA from a prestigious business school. String lights hung from the ceiling, and a massive banner proclaimed her achievement in gold letters. I'd arrived late on purpose, slipping in through the side entrance to avoid the initial rush of congratulations and small talk. My father had outdone himself with this party. The catering alone probably cost more than my entire college education, which he'd reminded me about at least a dozen times over the years. I watched him work the room, his hand perpetually on someone's shoulder, his laugh booming above the music. He was in his element, basking in reflected glory. I'd known this moment was coming. For weeks, my mother had been calling me, insisting I attend, telling me it would mean so much to my sister. I'd almost declined, but something stopped me. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the small, dying hope that for once, my father would acknowledge that I existed as something other than his disappointment. The toast came about an hour into the party. My father clinked his glass with a fork, and the room gradually fell silent. He stood at the center of the hall, microphone in hand, beaming with pride. He started by thanking everyone for coming, then launched into a speech about my sister's accomplishments. She'd graduated top of her class, secured a six-figure job at a consulting firm, and made him proud in every way imaginable. Then came the line that would change everything. He raised his glass higher and declared that finally, someone in this family was worth celebrating. The room erupted in laughter and applause. I saw my uncle slap his knee, my aunt cover her mouth as she giggled. My mother stood beside my father, her smile frozen, but her eyes briefly flicking toward me before looking away. My sister, to her credit, looked uncomfortable, but she didn't say anything. She never did. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation settle in my chest. This wasn't new. My father had been making jokes at my expense for as long as I could remember. When I'd chosen to study education instead of business, he'd called it a waste. When I'd become a high school teacher, he'd asked when I'd get a real job. When I'd bought my modest apartment, he'd wondered aloud why I'd settled for so little. What my father didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for 6 months. I'd found the documents by accident last spring. I'd gone to my parents' house to help my mother with some yard work while my father was supposedly at a business conference in Seattle. I'd needed to use the printer in his home office, and when I'd opened the desk drawer looking for paper, I'd found a folder tucked underneath a stack of old tax returns. Inside were bank statements from an account I'd never heard of. Transactions dating back 15 years. Regular withdrawals, sometimes small, sometimes substantial. Hotel receipts from cities my father had never mentioned visiting. Credit card bills for restaurants and gifts I knew he'd never given to my mother. I'd stood there in his office, my hands shaking as I flipped through page after page of evidence. My father, the man who'd built his reputation on integrity and family values, the man who'd lectured me endlessly about responsibility and hard work, had been living a double life. I'd taken photos of everything with my phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then I'd carefully replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it and finished helping my mother in the garden, all while my mind raced with what I'd discovered. Over the following months, I'd done my research. I'd hired a private investigator with money I'd saved from years of teaching summer school. The investigator had confirmed what the documents suggested. My father had maintained a relationship with another woman for over a decade. She lived in Portland, worked as a real estate agent, and my father visited her regularly under the guise of business trips. They'd even taken vacations together, including one to Hawaii that my father had claimed was a solo golf retreat. The investigator had given me a thick folder of photographs, phone records, and detailed reports. I'd kept everything in a locked box under my bed, waiting for the right moment. I'd known it would come. My father couldn't help himself. He needed an audience for his cruelty, and he'd eventually create the perfect opportunity for me to respond. As the laughter died down and my father continued his toast, I made my decision. I set down my champagne glass and walked toward the front of the room. People parted to let me through, probably thinking I was headed to the bathroom or getting ready to leave. My father noticed me approaching and his smile faltered slightly, but he kept talking. I reached the small stage where the DJ had set up his equipment and asked him if I could borrow the microphone for a moment. The DJ, a young guy with bleached hair, looked confused but handed it over. I turned to face the room, and the conversations gradually stopped as people realized something was happening. My father stood about 10 feet away, his expression somewhere between confusion and irritation. My mother had gone pale. My sister looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I told everyone that I wanted to thank them for coming to celebrate my sister's achievement. I said she'd worked hard and deserved recognition. Then I mentioned that since we were all here as a family, sharing in honesty and celebration, I thought it was the perfect time to share something I'd recently discovered. The room had gone completely silent now. I could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. I explained that I'd found some interesting documents in my father's office. Bank statements, hotel receipts, phone records. I said I'd been confused at first, wondering why there were so many unexplained expenses, so many trips that didn't match up with the business travel he'd told us about. My father's face had drained of color. He took a step toward me, telling me to stop, to shut up, that this wasn't the time or place. But I kept talking. I told the room about the private investigator I'd hired, about the woman in Portland, about the 15 years of lies and deception, about the vacation to Hawaii he'd taken with her while telling my mother he was attending a conference in San Francisco, about the jewelry purchases that had never made it home to his wife. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. My sister dropped her glass, and it shattered on the floor. The room had become a vacuum, everyone frozen in shock. I pulled out my phone and held it up, saying I had copies of everything. Bank statements, photographs, phone records, emails, months of documentation. I told my father that I'd been waiting for the right moment to share this information, and when he'd made his toast about finally having someone worth celebrating, I'd realized this was it. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Then my father lunged at me, trying to grab the phone. My uncle and 2 other men caught him, holding him back while he shouted that I was lying, that I was jealous, that I'd fabricated everything because I couldn't stand my sister's success. But my mother's face told everyone the truth. She'd suspected for years, I realized, watching her. She'd known something was wrong, but had never wanted to confront it. Now she couldn't avoid it anymore. People started gathering their things. The party dissolved in minutes, guests hurrying toward the exits, avoiding eye contact with anyone. My sister stood motionless in the center of the chaos, her perfect moment destroyed. Part of me felt guilty about that, but a larger part remembered every time she'd stood by silently while our father mocked me. Every time she'd benefited from being the golden child while I was the punchline. My mother approached me before I left. She asked if what I'd said was true, even though she already knew the answer. I told her it was, and that I had copies of everything if she wanted them. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face, and thanked me. That surprised me. I'd expected anger, but instead she seemed almost relieved that the truth was finally out. My father tried to corner me in the parking lot, but I'd parked near the exit specifically for this reason. I got in my car and left while he stood there shouting after me. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and severe. My mother called me the next morning and asked me to email her everything I had. I spent 3 hours sending her files, organizing them into folders, making sure she had a complete picture of my father's betrayal. She thanked me again, her voice hollow and exhausted. My father tried calling me 17 times that first day. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to angry again. He accused me of destroying the family, of being vindictive and cruel. He said I'd humiliated him for no reason, that I should have come to him privately if I had concerns. But that was the thing. I'd spent my entire life being humiliated by him, and he'd never done it privately. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty had been delivered in front of an audience. He'd made sure everyone knew I was the disappointment, the lesser child, the one not worth celebrating. He'd earned a public reckoning. My sister sent me a long text message 3 days after the party. She said I'd ruined the most important night of her life, that I was selfish and petty. She said she understood I had issues with our father, but destroying her graduation party was unforgivable. She said she needed space and didn't want to hear from me for a while. I didn't respond. What could I say? That she'd spent years benefiting from being the favorite while I was the scapegoat? that she'd never once stood up for me when our father made me the butt of his jokes. She was right that her party was ruined, but she was wrong about why I'd done it. It wasn't about her. It had never been about her. My mother filed for divorce 2 weeks after the party. She hired a prominent divorce attorney, someone who specialized in high-asset cases with complex financial situations. The attorney subpoenaed my father's business records, personal accounts, and credit card statements. My documentation became evidence in the proceedings. My father's business partners started distancing themselves from him. Turns out, reputation matters in commercial real estate, and being exposed as a cheater and liar doesn't play well with clients who value trust and integrity. He lost 2 major contracts within a month. The woman in Portland apparently ended their relationship after learning that his family had found out. According to my mother's attorney, my father had promised her he was separated and working toward divorce, just needed to wait for the right time. She'd believed him for over a decade. Update 2. It's been 4 months since the party. My mother is living in the house while the divorce proceeds through the courts. My father moved into a corporate apartment downtown. The settlement is going to be brutal for him. 15 years of hidden assets and secret spending gave my mother's attorney plenty of ammunition. My relationship with my sister remains fractured. She started therapy, and her therapist apparently suggested she might be struggling with some complicated feelings about our family dynamics. She sent me a shorter text last month, saying she was sorry for how she'd reacted, that she needed time to process everything. I appreciated the message, but haven't pushed for reconciliation. She needs to work through her own stuff, and I need to maintain my boundaries. My mother and I have gotten closer. She comes to my apartment for dinner once a week, and we talk about things we never discussed before. She admitted she'd known something was wrong for years, but had been afraid to confront it. She'd built her entire life around being his wife, around maintaining the perfect family image. Shattering that illusion meant facing how much time she'd wasted, how many warning signs she'd ignored. She told me she was proud of me for becoming a teacher, that she'd always admired my dedication to helping kids, but had been afraid to say so in front of my father. She said watching me stand up to him at the party had given her the courage to finally leave. That conversation made the whole thing worth it. My father has tried to reach out a few times through intermediaries. His brother called me, suggesting we should talk, that family was important, that people make mistakes. I told my uncle that I agreed people make mistakes, but spending 15 years lying to your family wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. A choice my father made every single day, including every time he belittled me in front of others while pretending to be a devoted family man. Work has been good. My students don't know anything about my personal drama, which is exactly how I want it. I've been nominated for a teaching award by our district, which is ironic timing. My principal called me into her office to tell me the news, and I thought about my father's toast at the party. Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating. Turns out I'd been worth celebrating all along. I just needed to stop waiting for his validation to believe it. Update 3. 6 months out now, and things have settled into a new normal. The divorce was finalized last week. My mother got the house, half of my father's retirement accounts, and a substantial alimony payment. His business has stabilized somewhat, but his reputation never fully recovered. Turns out being known as the guy who got spectacularly exposed at his daughter's graduation party by his own son doesn't inspire confidence in potential clients. My sister and I met for coffee 2 weeks ago. It was awkward at first, but we talked for 3 hours. She admitted she'd been angry at me for ruining her party, but over time she'd started to understand why I'd done it. She said she'd spent years being the golden child without questioning what that meant for me, without considering the cost of being our father's favorite. She apologized for never standing up for me, for letting him make me the punchline while she accepted the praise. I told her I was sorry her graduation got overshadowed, that I'd thought about doing it differently, but couldn't find another way. She understood, or at least she said she did. We're taking things slowly, rebuilding from scratch rather than trying to resurrect what we had before. My father sent me a letter last month. Actual handwritten letter, delivered by mail. In it, he said he'd been wrong to treat me the way he had, that he'd let his own ego and disappointment cloud his judgment. He said he'd always wanted me to be something I wasn't, and when I'd chosen my own path, he'd taken it as a personal rejection. He didn't apologize for the affair, didn't try to justify it. Just acknowledged that he'd failed as a father in more ways than one. I haven't responded. Maybe I will eventually, but I'm not ready yet. The anger has faded mostly, replaced by something like indifference. He can't hurt me anymore because I don't need his approval. That realization was worth everything. I won that teaching award. They held a ceremony at the district office, and my mother came. So did my sister. We took photos together afterward, the three of us smiling genuinely for maybe the first time in years. Nobody made speeches about me being worth celebrating. Nobody needed to. I'd already proven it to myself, and that was enough. Sometimes at night, I think about that moment at the party when I walked up to the DJ and asked for the microphone. My hands had been shaking, my heart racing so fast I thought everyone could hear it. I'd known that once I started talking, there would be no going back. My family would fracture, relationships would shatter, and life as I knew it would end. But I also knew that staying silent meant accepting another 30 years of being the disappointment, the punchline, the son not worth celebrating. It meant watching my father continue to deceive my mother while lecturing everyone else about integrity. It meant swallowing my humiliation one more time while he got to play the devoted patriarch. So I'd made my choice, and I'd live with the consequences. The thing about burning bridges is that sometimes you need the light to see where you're going. My father's house of lies had been built on our family's silence, on my mother's fear of confrontation, on my sister's willingness to accept her privileged position, on my own years of taking abuse without fighting back. Someone had to strike the match. I'm glad it was me.